to learn and engage. And I hope at the end of this, I will inspire some of you to take a look at the law as being something for the love of your life for all of time, like it has been mine. Mr. Shearer actually asked me to begin with my background. I am perhaps the most unlikely person to serve as a justice at the Supreme Court of Ohio. To me, looking back, I think at 17, I was in a hallway in my high school where Mr. Shearing, my high school general law teacher, said to me, I know you want to be a police officer, but I really believe because of how well you've done in this class, you could be more than that. Law enforcement is not a ceiling, it's a floor. And really in that conversation, he told me I could be a judge, I could be a lawyer someday. And at 17, I rocked back on my heels and I said, Mr. Shearing, that's not possible. And I think at 17, what I said to Mr. Shearing is, I'm not that kind of a kid. And in my mind at 17, what I believed, having never met a lawyer or a judge, I believe what that really meant was you had to have parents who were doctors and dentists or lawyers themselves. You had to be wealthy. You had to come from some elite form of background. But as he assured me, I would see the pathway, not really recognizing he would be later right. I went on my journey. I went to college first, the first to go to college in my family, earned my degree in social work from the University of Cincinnati, and then I began pursuing law enforcement jobs. Everybody says, well, Sharon, why'd you stop? Why'd you go to college first? Well, under the state law, you can't carry a firearm until you're 21. So you were going to be 21 until you could actually seek a law enforcement position. So I continued on with my education. And I think that part of Mr. Shearing is right. That education helped me see the inner workings of a courtroom. My internship as I achieved my bachelor's degree was down at juvenile court in Hamilton County, where I served as a probation officer. And it allowed me to then be in the courtroom to actually do exchanges with youth and teachers and see what that other side of the world looked like in law enforcement. But law enforcement was really the great equalizer in my life. It was then I really did have the opportunity to meet and have exchanges with judges and lawyers, have conversations, develop friendships. And there were a lot of them exactly like I thought they were when I was 17. There were a lot of really wealthy, generational lawyers or lawyers whose parents were doctors and dentists and the like. There are a lot of kids just like me. There are a lot of young people whose parents grew up in the Great Depression. They were the first to go to college, and they did not see a ceiling in their life as being held back by that socioeconomic background, like perhaps I did at 17. And I always doubted whether or not I was smart enough to be a lawyer. And I think that was quickly resolved when I was on the witness stand. And I was literally being asked a series of questions by a defense counsel. And I had this epiphany. I was like, wow, that guy made it through law school. I know I could. I'm a lot smarter than him. I could ask a lot better questions. And that was it. I literally left work that day and started calling law schools. What did I have to do to get in? And then I began making that plan, starting with taking the classes to help me actually be proficient at standardized testing when I took the law school admissions test. And after that, I was on my journey. Graduating from law school, I knew exactly what I wanted to do because while I was in law school, I clerked for a judge, probably the second greatest mentor in my life, Judge Crehan. And what Judge really helped me see was what I knew as a police officer, giving life to the Fourth and Fifth Amendment when I was out stopping cars, making arrests, conducting searches. The judge let me see the other part of the justice system. What happens in civil cases, the variety of civil cases, what a trial court judge really does on a day-to-day basis, what it's like to impanel a jury, to write jury instructions, to decide cases. It's tough making decisions, but you make them and you move on. So that really working with him really helped me really kind of formulate my pathway forward. I think if there's one thing that I can impart upon all of you, go get a copy of the Robert Frost poem, The Road Not Taken, because that is exactly how life unfolds. I could see my pathway very clearly. I could see becoming a law enforcement officer. I could see that. And then all of a sudden, these other opportunities develop, going to law school. But it was Judge Crehan on my final day clerking for him. He said, well, kid, what do you want to do? And I said, Judge, I think I want to be just like you. I think I want to try a lot of cases and then eventually one day be a trial court judge because I really loved what we did here. And he told me, kid, you're so young, so ambitious, you could do all of that and you could make it all the way to the Ohio Supreme Court. And in that moment, I did exactly what I did with Mr. Scheer. I started laughing at Judge Crehan and I said, well, Judge, that's not possible. I'm not one of those. And at 30 something, now at this day and age, I was still reflecting back on what I thought the socioeconomic limitations of my upbringing were. I had never been politically engaged. I had never met, other than judge and other judges, I hadn't really met any other elected officials. And I certainly didn't understand what it would be like to be a candidate. But he's the one who ushered me into a young person's group where I met my congressman for the 8th District. And it was there and then that I found opportunities to volunteer and really could see the pathway to becoming a trial court judge, but then ultimately running a statewide race for the Supreme Court of Ohio. And that was really through probably perhaps my greatest mentor, Mick Krieger, who actually helped me recognize what it was like to be the candidate, but also what it would take to be that candidate and run that race. I spent 14 years on the trial court bench after I was in private practice and what I call a small town practice. So I was someone who hung out a shingle and you would hire me or the court would appoint me to represent indigent individuals in criminal cases. And I tried cases in all the courts in Butler County, making it to the domestic relations court as a trial judge. And I was there 14 years before coming to the Ohio Supreme Court on December 7th of 2012. So that's really kind of my background and how I got here. But it's really, what does the system of justice do? I have this conversation so often in civic organizations or in schools, and I really like to impart this thought. Think about the gift of the Great Republic. You know, they gave us, the founders gave us, not a democracy, not a monarchy, not a dictatorship, and they could have given us any of that because they had all seen that. They had recognized what that would be. But this was the first ever original grand experiment of a constitutional supremacy form of government. Think about that. A government structure no one had ever seen. And they set about to give it birth and to give it to us and for us to caretake. And what is that system all set up? It's founded on the principles that we, the people, control government. And they said it best in the Declaration of Independence. It's often misquoted, but the second line in the Declaration of Independence is, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. But among them are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those natural rights, those God-given rights that they so enshrined in that document are protected against the overreach of government by the United States Constitution. And what that document creates is the tripartite system of government. Article 1, they shape our voice. In creating the legislative branch, Congress and the Senate, the House and the Senate, what they're really creating is our voice. We all have that voice. We get to vote for the men and women who serve us in Washington. We get to pick up the phone and say, there should be this law, but there shouldn't be that law. We have shut down the phone systems in Washington. making sure our voices were heard. We've gone to town hall meetings, we've rallied in Washington, and that's our voice. And in the second article, what they really gave us is the executive branch. And think about it in terms of, if you take out the Constitution and read it, it's very simplistic in giving the executive branch a limited form of powers. Now, everybody says to me, but Sharon, what happens if the legislative branch oversteps the boundaries into the executive branch, and the executive branch oversteps the boundaries into the legislative role? That's why we have courts, because they sue one another and we decide the case and controversies. So when you get to Article 3 of the United States Constitution, it really sets up the judicial branch. But how did they get the people to ratify it? Think about it. They didn't form this government and tell us we had to do it. They formed this government and gave us the choice to adopt it by ratifying it. And what I mean by ratification is that all of the colonies had to vote at that time, and the majority had to decide that, yes, we want to adopt this form of government. And how did they go about doing that? It was before the advent, obviously, of great technology like you have in your hand, I'm sure, or computers. It was printed. And this is where the Federalist Papers comes into view. I actually found this book not too long ago on a secondhand store. And it's called the Federalist Papers. And in it are all the Federalist Papers that the founders wrote in explaining why they were doing this form of government. You can get part of it online, but I am suggesting to you that this is a must-have for anyone who really wants to understand what a gift the founders have given us in this republic. And when you turn the book to page, when you get in the book and you turn to Federalist Paper 78, you have the ability to read about what they envisioned the judicial branch to do. All of us have a limited role in government. And in Federalist Paper 78, Alexander Hamilton writes that of all the branches, the judiciary would be the weakest branch. We would not have power of the taxation purse. We would not have charge of the standing army, for those powers were divided amongst the legislative branch and the executive branch. The judiciary would only have reason and judgment. At the time of our country's birth, Montesquieu was here from France, a philosopher and a member of the judicial branch as well. He actually wrote an essay that said the judicial branch would be next to nothing. But I'm 58 years old, and I assure you, I have witnessed over the course of my lifetime times where I actually believe the United States Supreme Court was greater than Congress or a president, because they had the power to strike down laws as being unconstitutional. They had the ability to interpret the Constitution in such a way as to make things legal, or to make things in our society unconstitutional and therefore illegal. But then when you overlay that federal system, and I always start there because you have to talk about the federal system to take a look at your own state, the great state of Ohio. When thinking about how states became part of the nation, you have to start with remembering where we come from. You see, even before the United States Constitution was adopted, 100% ratified the Northwest Ordinance. It was a territory across the Ohio Valley that begins in Marietta. And in it, they were giving free land to those service members and veterans who had served during the Revolutionary War. But what were they going to do in the new frontier, so to say? So what they did in the Northwest Ordinance is they say, look, no less than 3 states, but no more than 5 states can be created in this great Northwest Ordinance. And here are 2 things that any state in this new territory cannot do. Number 1, any state constitution must support the free exercise of religion. No state can prescribe or prohibit someone practicing their faith, and no state can create a religion. The other thing was no state could adopt slavery. That's right. It was in the Northwest Ordinance. It is often overlooked and not talked about, but I think it was really typifying where the country was going when the Northwest Ordinance was created. And we're talking in the 1700s. So at this time, where the United States Constitution is not prohibiting slavery, the founders are crafting a document of giving birth to new states where slavery was prohibited. There's been much debate on why that would be in the Northwest Ordinance. Many argue it's an economical aspect. At that time, the largest agricultural crop was tobacco. It was labor-intensive product, and therefore the South needed slaves to work the tobacco farms. And they didn't want, some say, the new states to compete in that market. I'd like to believe that we were a lot more enlightened, and we believe the very words in the second sentence of the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal and endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among them are the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But as we became a state in 1803, we had choices. Yes, we were going to create a constitution and ratify it, adopt it as ours. So when you take a look at the Ohio Constitution, Article 1 is actually our Bill of Rights, where you actually have to get to the amendments to the United States Constitution in order for you to see the Bill of Rights. That's why it's called the Bill of Rights. As an example of that, in Article 1 of the Ohio Constitution, we have the right to bear arms, the right to hold property, the right to, and the list goes on. Religious freedom, really enumerating and broadening, in a sense, our rights as protected under the United States Constitution. But there is when we set our own course for government. Article 2 creates our voice, the representative form of government. Members of the House and the Senate that serve us in Columbus, 132, 33 senators, 99 members of the House. Then it sets the executive branch, the governor, the attorney general, the secretary of state, the treasurer, the auditor. At the time of our birth as a state, we didn't have a lieutenant governor. It wouldn't be until the 1851 constitutional debates that would come up. And at that time in 1803, the legislature appointed all the judges. So you didn't have the right to vote for judges like you did members of the General Assembly or members of the executive branch. But in 1851, and it is a grand speech by Mr. Robertson from Fairfield County, who said, and I'm paraphrasing here, but we've long endured a great democracy in our republic, where we hold our elected leaders accountable to us. And today we should strike that same course in holding judges accountable to us. That if they do not do and abide by their limited role in our government, then we should unelect them and elect someone who will. And that's where we got the right to vote for judges in 1851. By and large, the Constitution has undergone many changes, but none so grand as the 1851, and that is literally the bedrock of our Constitution. Yes, changes happened in 1912, 1984, 1994, but nothing like 1851. So predominantly, our Constitution is still as it existed in 1851. And that is why I think this is a great grand republic. And I am so excited that we're learning about it together, this history. There's so much out there available to you to really contemplate. And you're the next generation to protect it, to defend it, to make sure that the generations that come behind you still receive the great republic that we received. I am often reminded of Benjamin Franklin leaving Independence Hall And there is a lady that says, "Doctor, doctor, what did you give us? A monarchy or republic?" And he says, "A republic, if you can keep it." What he was really talking about is the constant ebb and flow and the conflict and controversies between political parties. We should never let those overshadow the gift of the republic, of all of our voices working together for the betterment of all of Americans. And it's really what George Washington talked about, not only in his acceptance speech. George Washington was affiliated with neither political party of his time. He was an independent. Think about it. At that time, the Electoral College 100% elected by a 100% vote George Washington as the first president of the United States. Because they believed, because he was not politically affiliated and he wasn't tied to either party, that he could help bring forth the great republic. In his farewell address after his second term, it was never spoken, but it was published. You should read a copy of it. He really, I think, gives sage advice and cautions us against what's happening today, where political agendas and parties are really the head of what's going on in our controversies, instead of taking the step back to say what is best for all of America. So that's me in a nutshell, and that's why I love these opportunities to share with you, and would love to come back and do a talk on any other topic related to the Republic, the judiciary, or some of the amendments to the United States Constitution and how they interplay with our lives. But I think that's enough from me, and I'd like to open it up for questions.
Yeah, so you guys have questions, just type in the group chat there. Ask the judge anything you like. If not, I'll ask questions.
Don't be shy. You can ask me anything you want. Just be prepared. I give a frank and direct answer. I didn't realize how blinding that sun is in my window.
Can I
guess
ask the
my
question
home
through
office
voice instead?
is bright with light.
Hello? Somebody say something?
I asked if I could ask just through voice instead.
So my first
Okay.
question, thank you, Allison. I really appreciate your participation. What's your favorite part of your job? Two things, really. This time I have today. There is nothing better than being part of the elected system and being a statewide office holder, and the responsibility I feel that I really take on as being a steward of why we should learn more about the Great Republic, why it's so important to engage you, and why it's so important for you to understand this history so that you continue to pass it on, so that you love it as much as I do. So I think my opportunities to speak in schools and civic organizations is number one. I wouldn't have had that opportunity as a trial court judge, not at the level I have now. I think the second thing I love most about my work is it brought me home. When I was a private practitioner, a solo practicing attorney, I did a variety of cases, whether it was a juvenile case, a domestic relations case, a criminal case, civil cases. I was running around Butler County like a girl on fire, trying cases in all these courts. And I really loved the challenge of learning something new. I went to the trial court and I liked what I did, don't get me wrong, but after about 5 years, the learning curve kind of fell off. And it kind of felt like you were doing the same thing. I realized what I was doing was important work. I was caring for the lives of people's children and families as they were finding a new pathway after a marriage was ending. But coming to the Supreme Court takes me home, takes me back to having that wide variety of things to write on, new things to research. There is not a day that goes by that I don't learn something new, and to have the opportunity to really contemplate the law. and to recognize the awesome responsibility it is to serve as a justice. Because in the end, what I'm doing is I'm deciding the fate of your lives. Every time we make a decision, every time we declare a statute unconstitutional or uphold it as being constitutional, anytime we're resolving, denying, or granting public records requests, it's an amazing opportunity to be a good steward and a caretaker of our liberty and freedom as the founders designed it. Allison, thank you so much for being the first questioner. I really appreciate your courage. We have many other questions, so let me take them in order. This is from Ainsley. Thank you so much. Have there been any points where you wanted to change your career choice? I can honestly say that the only thing I ever thought about doing was the opportunity to go back to law enforcement. There is a part in Living Your Life by the Robert Frost poem of understanding that when you are given opportunities, you need to decide if you're going to take them. And if you choose not to take them, those opportunities may never return. And I was standing at that crossroads of, do I go to law school now or do I wait? Because I really wanted to be a detective. I think I'm a uniquely good problem solver, and I think I have a critical eye for detail. And I really would have liked to have been that detective solving a homicide, solving a cold case. I really love that. But seeing the opportunity and the pathway at that moment, I really thought if I stayed long enough to be a detective, that opportunity to be a lawyer and a judge someday would be fleeting at best. Because I knew how much longer I had to stay at the department before I could take a detective test. I looked at everyone who was a detective, the likelihood of retirement in that pathway. So I took a leap of faith in going to law school, knowing that I was probably foreclosing. Because at the end of the Robert Frost poem, what does he tell us? We're not likely to return at that point in time. But because we have chosen that path that wanted where, our life is all the better for. Thanks so much for a great question. I really, really appreciate it. Then the next, Carson, thank you so much. All right, I'll just type it out then. My question is about your stance towards your job. Whenever you have a trial, are you excited or looking forward to it? Or is it just one more everyday work? I loved trials when I was in the trial court. It really gave me the opportunity to engage the lawyers, to examine the evidence, to have witnesses on the witness stand, to actually decipher for myself, because as a trial court judge in domestic relations, we don't have juries. So I was the sole finder of fact in every single case. I wrote all my own opinions and authored more than 1,000 in my 14 years at the trial court. So I looked at every trial as a great opportunity to do something unique. Some of the evidence that you would get into is fantastic. The difference here and being in the appellate world is I don't try cases anymore. I do make findings of fact in certain cases like writs of mandamus when we're doing public records cases and the like. But by and large, I'm reviewing appellate review. And like I said, I find it exciting every single day. Great question. Thank you so much. Is it VADA? What does it take to be a judge? Is it a lot? Well, you have to go to law school. You must like reading. So after 4 years of college, 3 years of law school. Now there are some programs in Ohio that give you a 3x3, and what that means is if you go to a college that has an accredited law school, some of them get you the 3x3. So you actually complete your 4th year of undergraduate work as your 1st year of law school, removing that 7th year that I would have done. And then you practice law. According to Ohio law, you have to practice 6 years before you can run for a judgeship. When I say run, that means you put your name on a ballot, and that comes with all the requirements of what it takes to get on the ballot successfully, the ethics rules and abiding by them, and serving as a candidate and the like.
Judge,
Do it, I assure you, you can do it. So if
Judge,
your pathway is to become a trial court judge or a justice at the Supreme Court, jump in. Grab your brass ring. The American dream as you define it.
Judge, related to that, real quick, because you talk about running for office, are you up for re-election this year? When's the next time you're up for election?
I do. I am on the November 3rd ballot of 2020. Judges run every 6 years. So it's kind of awkward because everybody says, well, Sharon, you came to the court December 7th of 2012. That would have meant you ran in 18. I ran for an unexpired term. So someone had a 6-year term, they left the court. So I ran for the last 2 years of that term. So once I completed that 2-year term remaining on that term, I had to run again for the full 6 years. And that was 2014, which brings me to 2020 as this year's race.
And then also, because we study mostly, federal government, and our regular government classes do study Ohio government, but what's your position on judges running for their seat as opposed to, lifetime appointments that we have on the federal level? And why we have one and the other, advantages, disadvantages?
Well, I think that at the time, the founders, when you read the Federalist Papers and you go back to 78 and 79, what they were very concerned about was maintaining the independence of the judiciary. What they worried about is if you were being elected and subscribing to a political party, would you legitimately be independent, or would you be put upon by a political party? So the federal system is set, and it is a lifetime appointment. I can't envision that the founders believe that you would be living as long as we are today. Well, the average age of life expectancy back at that time was 47. Some of the founders lived into their 70s and 80s, but I don't really think they envision judges coming by way of an appointment and then being there till they're 80 or 90. So there are many who believe that it's time to do a ratification of the federal Constitution with a new amendment and to put in term limits for federal judges. What does that take? It takes a constitutional amendment and a ratification by 35 states. Have I seen it? I've seen people talk about it in the outside world, but no one who's really picked up the mantle seriously. Turning a spotlight on the state courts, you understand that we control what happens here in Ohio. And there's two different views across the United States and states. So some states have what's called the Missouri Plan, which is merit selection, where a group of 10 people are appointed to a commission and they decide who's best qualified to sit. And then they run for what's called a retention election, which means the people go in an up-down vote and say yes or no. And if you get 60% of the vote, then you remain. What I really love about Ohio's system is because I find shortcomings, grievous shortcomings in the merit selection. Who decides who the 10 people are? And usually what happens when you look at those states with merit selection is all of a sudden there becomes a political animal aspect to those groups as well. They come out of one farm or school of thought. So then they're only looking for those people that look like them. So you lose the independence of the judiciary. But also when you look at the merit selection and then the election by retention, it becomes a lifetime appointment. 98% of those that come through that system remain like a lifetime appointment. The other thing you see, and that's happened since 2010, that's been written about pervasively, is that you actually end up seeing the limitation. So the limitation would be, if you look at the Iowa Supreme Court race in 2010, $25 million of outside money and influence came into Iowa and really ran a strong campaign against the three justices. They couldn't run a campaign for themselves. They couldn't raise money. They couldn't fight back against that $25 million of outside influence, and all three of them lost. So I think you're also handcuffing or limiting a judge in those situations. What ends up happening now is the discussion is maybe it's time that we need merit selection and cut the people out altogether. This is a personal decision each and every one of you need to make. But as a citizen of the United States, there is nothing, no constitutional right I would ever give up to any arm of government. There is no constitutional right to vote that I would relinquish to anyone, because I don't believe 10 people sitting in Columbus are going to remove politics from the room. It's just politics behind the screen. And I don't believe anyone can make a decision better than Sharon Kennedy and what she wants in government. And I have very strong convictions about what the role of the judiciary is. And those strong convictions come from the Federalist Papers themselves. That I don't have free rein to do what I want. That my role is limited to interpreting the law as it is written and applying it as written, not rewriting it or legislating from the bench. I do not believe that I have the ability to move the law forward. That's your job in picking up the phone and calling your representatives. Great question. Thank you so much. What is the best and worst part of the education you had to receive to become a judge? I have to tell you that law school was like having your world of thought torn down. So they were really breaking down the way you think about the world and then putting you back together. I can argue any point, whether I agree with it or not. That's what law school taught me. I was somewhat resistant to it because as a law enforcement officer, the world is black and white. There is not a lot of gray in that. You either violated the speeding limit or you didn't. You either ran the red light or you didn't. You were either OVI or you weren't. You either broke into the house or you didn't. So I came from a very black and white world of applying the law. But really what it really taught me to do is being a critical thinker. And I think it really helped me, especially in private practice, because it didn't matter if I agreed with my client or not. It didn't matter if I liked their position or not. It gave me the opportunity to advocate zealously for them. That was really my job as a lawyer. And as I turned then to become a trial court judge and now a justice, I think law school really helped me critically analyze how do you go apart, breaking apart a statute? How do you really read the law? What is the Constitution? And looking at it at the time it was created, text, history, context. So when I wrote the majority opinion in a school case, we went to the 1912 Constitution, opened up the provisions and said, what do these words mean in 1912? Because let's be honest, words take on different meanings as time goes on. So as a result of that, it's been fantastic. But I will say 7 years is a long time to go to school. Next question from Allison. Thank you so much. Is my cousin wants to be a judge. What's your best advice I should give her? Be intentional. What I mean by being intentional is appreciate what you have to do to get there. If she is a resident in the state of Ohio, it means putting yourself out there as a candidate. And the best way to do that is go volunteer. Understand what it's really like to be a candidate. Understand what it's really like to run a campaign, to see it from the grassroots to the candidate, all the decisions in between. I spent my entire private practice volunteering on political campaigns, running, managing campaigns, giving up most of my free time to do it. It's the skill set that I needed to develop to then become a candidate myself. there is no education like experience to help you see through. It also helps define who you are as a candidate, to actually see what other candidates have gone through, to see the difficulty in answering certain questions and what it means to give up part of your life. When I decided to run for the Supreme Court, I talked to 3 people first. One, my mom. And my mom said she didn't want me to do it. She was afraid. She was afraid that if I would fail, it would hurt my feelings. And I actually said to her, who is this? Where is my mother? Where's the person who taught me to live like I'm a girl on fire, to go out and chase my dreams? And she says, I don't know who that person was that gave you that advice. It sounds kind of silly. It wasn't. Chase your dreams. Only you can decide to give them up. No one else can. And I told my mom I'd rather be 50 years of age and chasing my dream than wondering for the rest of my life, what if? Never live from that glass plane of what ifs. Always take the opportunity to excel, to achieve your dream. Then I talked to Judge Crehan. And I was really surprised by his response because he was a little afraid, exactly like my mother. And he said, well, gosh, Ohio's a big state. How do you do that? And I said, Judge, I don't know, but what happened to the guy that said you could make it all the way to the Ohio Supreme Court? And he says, I remember saying it, but I think I was kind of stupid for saying that. I said, no, you weren't. I can do this. And then it was going back to Mick Krieger, the man that I volunteered most for Congressman Boehner. And when you're talking with Mick, if he starts laughing at your idea, stop talking because he thinks it's ridiculous. And I said, well, you're not laughing. And he says, I haven't heard anything funny yet. He said, until you answer these 10 questions, you cannot answer this question. And the first 4 of those questions were, are you willing to give up your life? Are you willing not to be home every night? Are you willing to live on the road? Because that's what it takes to be a statewide candidate. People fail to appreciate how much you give up, the sacrifices you and your families make as a result of being that statewide candidate. But I can tell you the trade-off has been worth it. The ability to serve as a justice, the ability to be the shepherd of judicial restraint, of living the life of Federalist Paper 78 and ensuring that I am passing it on to the next generation. Nothing has been greater in my life.
Okay, Judge, I have a time limit that we're allowed to use on this since it's not a paid account.
Okay.
Is there a way that any of the students could maybe get a hold of you if they had a question that you'd be willing to answer for them, or is that a possibility, or maybe through me if they?
Absolutely. There's 2 messages left here, or
Okay.
no, there's multiple. So what I will do is I will respond to everyone's question remaining and send you the email
That sounds good.
directly to you with the names of who's asked what.
Great. That'd be awesome. Well, thank you so much. That's been wonderful. You killed it. So
Thank you.
I'll let Judge Fabro know that we can keep inviting you back to the program.
I appreciate that.
So,
Now, if you hang up, will all these questions disappear?
that's a good question.
I'm going to take a couple screenshots because I have the pictures up or the questions up.
Oh, also, I did record this. I want to make sure I have your permission so that our students can watch this on a YouTube video. Is that okay with you?
Certainly.
Okay.
Thank you for all of you who have thanked me. I appreciate your time so very much.